In this speed drill, both athletes are professional rugby players. Firstly, here we have athlete A, displaying a lack of capacity in their acceleration. If we break down the footage of the drill, the participant exhibits flexion of the thoracic in a bid to achieve a low torso position, when in fact there should be a greater total global forward angle. This may occur due to an inadequate anterior core strength, as well as the fact that there is hip flexion displayed can be alluded to a lack of strength within an inability to produce triple extension, tying in with the underlying issue of a poor forward lean angle. From this analysis, we can draw upon two strength capacity issues, which are anterior core strength endurance and lower body unilateral strength. To address athlete A's lack of anterior core strength, I'll have them perform an isometric plate hold off the glute ham developer. This has them keep a stable lumbar spine position whilst experiencing propulsive forces the anterior core will have to absorb in the acceleration and maximal sprint phase.
The second exercise I have the athlete perform is a banded puppet march. This allows the athlete to get in a good forward lean position, with their hands above the head influencing the athlete to maintain thoracic extension, as well as engaging the anterior core and trunk. Furthermore, it practices effective application of force with intent into the floor, as well as a good knee drive. Finally, to develop the unilateral hip strength that is lacking in athlete A, I prescribed they perform a single-legged barbell hip thrust, a medium in which the athlete can improve and express their horizontal propulsive force through an anterior-posterior movement.
And finally is a marching sledge push, which I believe is an effective exercise as it enables the athlete to maintain an aligned spine as well as practice triple extension, thus negating the exhibited hip flexion from athlete A.
Here we have athlete B performing a similar acceleration drill. From the off, we can observe that the swing leg, being driven forward by the knees, has too much of a flight time. This can also be a main cause for why the athlete's heel or foot is too high from the ground, as well as their toe stance being too far ahead of their centre of mass. This reaching toe stance causes a greater braking force than is needed, thus affecting the athlete's ability to generate as much maximum horizontal propulsive force as possible, whilst progressively reducing their ground contact time. To firstly prove that this is a skill issue and not a capacity, athlete B has the ability to maintain an aligned trunk position whilst in that forward lean angle. This in turn, with a neutral spine, he is able to maintain or balance out the two torques produced, one from the horizontal propulsive force and the other against ground force reaction. Furthermore, to counter the argument that the excessive reach is to compensate for the athlete's inability to produce force equal to that of the gravity and lean, causing an imbalance of torque, here is footage of athlete B performing lower limb posterior chain exercises. As you can see, athlete B is more incapable of supporting the forces that their lower limbs may generate. In conclusion, it is apparent that a capacity such as relative strength is irrelevant and it is instead a skill issue. Therefore, the focus of athlete A's acceleration is to rectify their step and flight time as well as step length. Thus, the following drills are focusing on touchdown velocity and touchdown distance.
Here is the same drill performed by athlete A but for B, and I will justify my reasons as so. Here I have Alex perform simply a sledge march,
focusing on his toe stance relative to his centre of mass, as well as programming that swing leg to spend less time in flight and keep low to the floor. This drill would also be coupled with a wall drill, typical one step followed by subsequent two step. These drills focus on cueing the pull back, which in turn reduces the braking force of the swing leg. Through these drills, athlete B's foot velocity relative to travelling velocity will be less, thus causing a reduction in braking forces. By focusing on repositioning athlete B's limbs in an optimal position, with stance toe
just in front of centre of mass,
he's more able to propel them himself horizontally. Okay, here we have athlete C performing a 180-degree turn. As he approaches the line, he comes in with a rather upright body position, plants his foot in what seems to be an effective position. However, you can see that he doesn't want to load that leading leg. This is most likely down to a mobility issue in not being able to sit down into that posterior hip capsule, thus loading their posterior chain. Resultantly, athlete C, to compensate, collapses their lumbar spine as well as displaying thoracic flexion, therefore failing to maintain an aligned trunk position despite displaying relatively good external rotation. In conclusion, to take away from athlete C's 180-degree change direction drill, for them to rotate and explode out effectively, or relatively effectively, they collapse their lumbar and thoracic extension, going into flexion, advertently avoiding loading that posterior chain due to, in my opinion, a lack of mobility of the hip. Thus, with the focus being mobility for athlete C, I believe joint distraction work of their hip capsule is the most effective route to take. Distraction work applies a vector to that hip capsule complex, allowing separation of the joint surfaces and improving the sliding or rotating capabilities, which will inherently enhance the mechanical action of the joint, thus allowing athlete C to sit back more into their posterior chain and recruit that much needed power to optimally get away from the line. Here is athlete D performing the same agility drill with a 180-degree turnaround. As you see, as they approach the line, they get into a low position, chopping their feet effectively. However, just as he hits the line, he overstrides with full extension of that leading leg. Also, his hips are not open enough, thus his foot is not parallel to the line. And also can be observed is a lack of hip flexion. Therefore, little loading of the posterior chain. Resultantly, when stepping away from the turnaround, he is unable to generate any impulse into the floor, if little, with no power being generated and directed into the ground to drive himself away. This is why he uses his right leg as an anchor to compensate for him to try and punch his left leg across and accelerate. We can notice how it takes athlete D more distance than is necessary to begin accelerating, especially if their turnaround angle is different to which they arrived from. In conclusion, I believe this is a skill issue, based on evidence that the athlete in the weight room has displayed very competently that their posterior body strength is more than capable of dealing with this load, as well as displaying competent hip mobility. Drills to target this skill issue. I first start with a simple sway drill, looking to load that posterior chain, focusing on that foot, knee, hip alignment, and pushing out of that hip using their posterior strength.
Notice a return of athlete B demonstrating these drills.
This then progresses with a gradual increase of steps, introducing more momentum whilst focusing on still maintaining that effective alignment. Furthermore, the increase in momentum means a progressive loading of the hip, which in turn requires the athlete to get in a lower body position. And a final progression of this would be the use of verbal cueing to which side the athlete is to turn from, thus using a simple cueing of colours, with the involvement of a cone causing the athlete to get into an even lower body position and loading that hip capsule posterior chain
complex.